We are now on Chapter 19, Configuring Windows Firewall. In this chapter, we will look at the purpose of a firewall, configuring the firewall using Control Panel, configuring the firewall using Windows Firewall with Advanced Security, Firewall Rules, ports, enabling rules, and creating custom rules. A firewall is a piece of software that's used to block unwanted traffic. A firewall can be installed on a router, or a firewall can be installed and configured on a server and on a workstation as well. Let's look at configuring the firewall using Control Panel. If I click on the Windows key, I can see here's Control Panel. I click on Control Panel, and in Control Panel I select System and Security. Then I select Windows Firewall. We can see an option that says Turn Windows Firewall on or off. Firewall is not enabled, so I will enable the firewall for the domain network connections, for the private network connections, and for public network connections as well. Now, for a computer which is a domain controller, the public network connection is not really going to be an issue because you typically don't take a domain controller to the airport or to Starbucks with you. When the firewall is enabled, then what it does is it blocks all incoming traffic except return traffic. So if a user tries to download something, if they request something from a website, then it will come through the firewall. When you enable a firewall at its most basic level, it blocks all incoming traffic except return traffic. So then this raises the question, what if you do want to allow certain types of traffic to come in on the firewall? For example, web traffic. To allow an application to pass through the firewall, let's look at the example of allowing internet traffic to go through the firewall. The Internet Explorer is typically used for web traffic. So let's allow Internet Explorer to come through the firewall. I go to Control Panel. Under System and Settings, I select Windows Firewall, and then I select Allow an App or Features through Windows Firewall. I then click on Allow Another App, and I specify the app that I want to allow, in this case, the Internet Explorer. I then click on Add, and you can see that the Internet Explorer will now be allowed to come through the firewall for the public firewall, and I can enable it for the private and domain as well. Automatically allowing traffic through the firewall. Frequently, we open ports in the firewall and we don't even know it. And the example is remote desktop. When you enable, or when the user enables remote desktop, what that does is it opens a port in the firewall. It allows traffic through the firewall. People configure the firewall and they don't even know they're doing it. If we wanted to enable remote desktop, which allows us to remotely manage a computer, which allows us to run remote desktop, which opens a port in the firewall, what we do is we go to System and Settings, and we go into System, and under Remote Settings, here we have Choose Remote. We have Remote Desktop, which is currently not enabled. If I select the checkbox that says Allow Remote Connections to this computer, and I click on OK, I get a message that says Remote Desktop Firewall Exception will be enabled. And I click on OK. And then if I go back and I look at that firewall, I can see a remote desktop connection exception has been made in the firewall. I can select public if I want. Here's a second example of when people open ports in the firewall and don't even know it. Network discovery. Network discovery allows the browsing of the network. Here is what the network looks like if networking discovery is disabled. You try to browse the network and you can't see any other computers. But when it's enabled, here's what it looks like. You can see the other computers which are running, and they can see you. So if you do want to enable network discovery, what that will do is it will allow browsing and open ports in the firewall. To enable network discovery, I go to Network and Internet, and I select the Network and Sharing Center, and I select Change Advanced Sharing Settings. And under the option that says Network Discovery, when Network Discovery is on, this computer can see other computers and devices and is visible to other computers on the network. So I will select the radio button that says Turn on Network Discovery, and what that will do is configure the firewall to allow browsing traffic so I can see the other computers on the network. If we go back to System and Security, and we go to the Windows Firewall, we can see that now network discovery has been allowed as an exception in the firewall. When we enable network discovery, it opens ports in the firewall and it allows the browsing for the network. And when network discovery is enabled, then you can see and be seen. So we can see there are at least two methods of allowing programs through the firewall. One, you actually go to the firewall and you add the exception, or another way is automatically. When you enable a feature, you might not necessarily be thinking about it, but you are opening a port in the firewall. Now let's turn to Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. If we go to Server Manager and then select Tools and then select Windows Firewall with Advanced Security, and I right-click and I select Properties, we see that we can configure the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security for the domain profile, which means all the computers connected to the corporate network, or we can specify a different set of settings for the private network, or we can specify yet a different set of settings if a computer is in a public location. And of course we can configure IPsec as well, which is short for TCP/IP security. We'll talk about that one later. A firewall rule is used to block or allow traffic. A firewall rule is an if-then statement that can allow or block traffic. For example, here's a real common firewall rule. If port is equal to 80, which means web traffic, then allow. Let's look at a firewall rule. Let's look at an example of where the firewall rule is used to allow web traffic. We go to the inbound rules, and we can see there's a rule here. It says worldwide web service for HTTP traffic in. Now notice it's a green box, which means it's currently enabled. A green circle. If it was a gray circle, it means it is a rule which is not currently enabled. If I right-click on this rule and select Properties, I can see that the name of the rule is the World Wide Web Services HTTP traffic in. And the description says it allows inbound traffic for TCP port 80. Is this rule enabled? Yes, it is. I know that because there's the checkbox that says it's enabled, and also it's a green circle and not a gray circle. And what does this rule do? Block traffic or allow traffic? You can see that this rule is used to allow traffic. Now, if we look at protocols and ports, we can see that it uses port number 80. Allowing web traffic opens port number 80. So what is a port? A port is a field in an IP header that identifies the program or service that the packet is destined for. Let's review what's meant by an IP packet. An IP packet is a message sent from one computer to the other computer, and one part of the message includes the data that we are sending, such as ABC, and then the header specifies who it's going to, in this case computer 10.0.0.10. The packet header not only shows the IP address of the destination computer, but it also shows the port number. And the port number identifies the destination program. Port number 80 is web traffic. Port number 21 is FTP traffic. So a firewall allows traffic based upon port number. It can be based upon other things as well, typically based upon port number. A firewall rule is an if-then statement that allows or disallows traffic based upon port number, or it can also be based upon IP address. The typical example being, if port number 80, then allow the traffic. Terminology, a couple ways of saying the same thing. If you want to allow a program through the firewall, you can say that you're going to allow a program through the firewall. This is also known as opening a port in the firewall, and this is also known as punching a hole in the firewall. The purpose of punching a hole in the firewall is to open a port in the firewall that allows the program to go through the firewall. Enabling rules. We've seen that you can enable firewall rules automatically and not even know that you're enabling it. You can also enable firewall rules manually. To manually enable a rule using the Windows firewall with advanced security, notice we see the rules with the green circle next to them are currently enabled. There's a column here that says enabled. But the rules with the gray circle next to them are not enabled. Notice the column that says enabled no. So if I wanted to enable this role for file and printer sharing, to enable file and printer sharing, I can right click and select enable rule, and now you can see the rule is a green circle indicating that it has been enabled. Creating a custom rule. Here's the example. We want to allow VMware vSphere management traffic to go through the firewall. How come? Because we have a VMware server with virtual machines, and VMware vSphere traffic is used to manage that VMware server. The vSphere management traffic uses port 902. So we need to open port 902 on the firewall. So here's how we're going to do it. There is no existing rule here where I can just right click and say enable this rule that's pre-configured for 902. This has got to be a custom. So I right click on inbound rules and I select new rule. Then I select port rule because it's port number 902. Click on next. We specify that it's TCP port 902. Notice the example 80, real common port number. We specify 902 followed by next. Do we want to block the connection or allow the connection? In this case, we want to allow the connection followed by next. We will have it applied to all three domain profiles followed by next. And the name of the rule would be VMware vSphere client. I click on description and I will give it a brief description such as allows VMware management traffic. Click on finish. And there the new rule is currently enabled. Firewall rule is an if-then statement that allows or blocks traffic. It can be created automatically. When you enable a feature, you don't even know you're enabling it. It can be manually created, and sometimes you have to create custom rules. A firewall rule is an if-then statement that can allow or block traffic based upon port number or IP address or network address. An example being, if port number is 80, then allow. Or if source network is 6.10.0.0, then block. Firewalls can be configured per computer, or they can be configured domain-wide using group policy. To configure firewalls domain-wide using group policy, we go under Tools and we select Group Policy Management. And in this example, if I select the default domain policy, right-click and select Edit, here is the Windows Firewall with Advanced Security. And what I configure here will apply to every computer in the domain because this is the default domain policy. Using group policy objects to configure firewall rules. It can be done domain-wide or it can be done just per organizational unit. Exporting rules. You can export any custom rules that you have made for uses on other systems. Here's the example. Here are my inbound rules. I want to export them all. I right-click, I select Export List. I type the name of the file that I want to save it to. Could be a USB drive, could be a hard disk. I click on Save. That saves the rules, and then I can send them to another location that might want to use those same rules. I'd probably just email them to them. Using filters. Okay, confusing term of the word filter. A firewall is a filter used to filter traffic. That's not what they mean here. All they mean here is to filter which firewall rules will be displayed to you, the network administrator. Confusing use of the word filter here. If I just want to see the profile rules or and I only want to see the domain-wide rules, for example, I use the filter to only display the domain-wide rules. Or I might only want to look at the rules that's current state was currently active. Or I might want to look at the rules that fall into one particular group. So let's look at an example. Let's look at displaying only domain profile rules. Or I could display only enabled rules. So here's the example. I will go to my rules, right-click, display by profile, and I will select filter by domain rule. Now notice the profile rules here, I see all kinds of rules from all kinds of different profiles, domain, private, and public. But if I select domain-wide only, now it will only display the domain of the rules which apply to domain profiles. Now let's look at creating connection security rules. The purpose of this is to protect against eavesdropping. IPsec means TCP/IP security. You know, IP is the Internet Protocol, so IPsec is the Internet Protocol secure. It can be used to authenticate and secure traffic, and this is called tunneling. When you encrypt everything between two endpoints, they call that tunneling. So let's do that. Let's right-click. Let's go down to Firewall Advanced Security and select Connection Security Rules. And as you can see, there are currently no rules to view. So I will right-click and select New Rule. And this will be a custom rule followed by Next. It will apply to all computers at the first endpoint, and it will apply to all computers at the other endpoint. This will apply to all computers, all IP addresses, followed by Next. When do you want authentication to occur? We can select Request, but for real security, we are going to select Require authentication for inbound and outbound connections. Followed by Next. What authentication method do you use? We will use IPsec. Encrypts TCP/IP, secures TCP/IP traffic. I click on Next. Which protocols do you want to apply this to? Just port number 80? We want to do it for all traffic, all protocols, all ports. Click on Next. Which domain profiles do you want it to apply to? In this example, all of them. I click on Next. Then I will give it a name to secure all traffic. Now maybe you don't want to secure all traffic in the entire domain. Maybe you just want to secure traffic to or from particular servers. But in this particular example, it's securing all network traffic in the domain. Click on Finish, and you can see I've created my connection security rules, which can secure all traffic between computers within the domain. Connection security rules is where IPsec is used to authenticate and secure sensitive traffic. It can be implemented domain-wide or per organizational unit. Chapter 19, Summary. We saw that a firewall is a piece of software, and it's made up of rules. And a rule is an if-then statement that's used to allow or block traffic. And it can be based upon port number or IP address or network address or other criteria. It can be configured from within Control Panel or by using Windows Firewall with advanced security. We looked at enabling rules, at creating custom rules. We saw that the firewall can be configured per computer or domain-wide. And this concludes Chapter 19. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.